Good afternoon, New York, and the rest of our listeners around the globe. My name is June Stoyer, and I'm the host of the Organic View radio show. Our podcast is available on iTunes, Zune, and all major podcast providers. So if you can't catch the show live, you can download it or simply use our free podcast player, which is available on our website at www.theorganicview.com. If you'd like to connect with us, please post a question on our wall on Facebook or send me a tweet at June Stoyer on Twitter. If you'd like to be on the show or would like to find out about sponsorship opportunities, please contact us at questions@theorganicview.com. Today's show is sponsored by Eden Foods, the most trusted name in certified organic clean food. Listeners of the Organic View can receive 20% off any regularly priced items, excluding cases, by simply using the coupon code ORGVIEW. That's ORGVIEW. For more promotional offers, please visit our website at www.theorganicview.com. Also, don't forget to check out our contest section on our website for your chance to win one of our cool prizes. For more information, please visit www.theorganicview.com/contests. On today's show, Tom and I are going to talk about a very controversial topic, New York State's task force to protect pollinators. In June of 2014, President Obama issued a presidential memorandum directing an interagency task force to create a strategy to promote the health of honeybees and other pollinators. In May of 2015, the White House announced that under the leadership of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and U.S. Department of Ag, the task force is releasing its strategy with three overarching goals. First, reduce honeybee colony losses to economically sustainable levels. 2, increase monarch butterfly numbers to protect the annual migration. And 3, restore or enhance millions of acres of land for pollinators through combined public and private action. Over the summer, New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo issued a proclamation affirming that New York is committed to the promotion of the health and recovery of the pollinator population, which will be the focus of a new state agency task force. While this appears to be a huge step in the fight to protect our rapidly declining pollinator population, there's a great deal of concern that this is not going to be effective. So first, I'd like to welcome to the show my co-host, Colorado beekeeper Tom Theobald. Good afternoon, Tom.
Good afternoon, Joan. We're expecting our first possibility of snow tomorrow.
And joining us today is commercial beekeeper Jeff Anderson from California, Minnesota Honey Farm.
Good afternoon, June, and good to talk with you again, Tom.
Hi, Jeff. How are you doing?
Putting one foot in front of the other, trying to get bees ready to get out of Minnesota. We already had our first inch of snow, which only lasted for just a few hours, so we're ahead of you in Colorado.
I think that's what we're going to have tomorrow.
In regards to this task force in New York, I think it's great that Governor Cuomo is stepping up to the plate, but I'm concerned that this is another repeat of what the White House has already done, and basically this is the second effort by the White House to appease people that are concerned about the rapidly declining population of our pollinators.
I think if the governor is stepping up to the plate, we're about to ball four. This is an empty gesture, in my view.
Jeff, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that what's going on in the state of New York is something that's basically going to go on or is in the process of going on in most of the states right now. The president indicated he wanted to create managed pollinator protection plans. They call them MP3s. And I believe that's what's going on in New York is they're trying to establish this plan. One of the things that kind of catches my attention is that they're talking specifically about managed pollinators. So logically, one would think that they're probably would include beekeepers in that discussion.
But have they? Who constitutes the 12-person committee that's going to come up with this, Jeff?
Well, I don't have a list of people in New York that are doing this, but I do know from talking with New York beekeepers that they do have the president of the New York State Beekeepers Association as one of the participants, and then they have a hobby beekeeper. One thing that's worth pointing out is that the state Beekeepers organization in New York has roughly 300 members, but there are roughly 3,000 beekeepers in the state, a number of smaller, either hobbyists or small commercial beekeepers. So even though they have the president of the state organization as part of their committee, they don't really have a good cross-representation of the beekeepers in the state of New York.
Well, I was looking at the makeup of the 12-person committee, and I'm reminded of a statement attributed to Benjamin Franklin. I'll paraphrase him. It looks like 10 wolves and 2 lambs sitting down to decide what's for lunch. And it looks to me, as a beekeeper and as an observer, that it's the beekeepers who are going to be for lunch. I don't see anything of any real substance in these plans, and as a beekeeper, I'm very concerned about one element, and I think you may be as well, Jeff, and that is the 48-hour notice. Maybe you could give us your views on that.
One of the things that the managed plans seem to all include, or most include, is a provision to notify commercial beekeepers. Earlier I mentioned that this is for managed pollinator protection plan, and so one of the provisions that seems to be fairly prevalent in almost every plan is a list of beekeepers or a registry of beekeepers, and with the concept that then applicators that would want to apply pesticides would contact the beekeeper roughly 48 hours before they intend to apply a pesticide, with the concept that beekeepers would then somehow be able to remove their honeybees and keep them from harm. And the problem is that, we're talking one species of pollinator here, Apis mellifera honeybee, that's intended to be protected in this scenario. The thing that really floors me about that, is that basically the pollinator toxic pesticides already have label warnings and prohibitions which keep pollinators safe. And basically, if there's bloom in the field, pollinators would be present because the bloom is what they feed on. It's the pollen and the nectar. The pollen is the protein that they need in their diet, and the nectar is the carbs that they need in their diet. And so if there's no bloom present, pesticide applications generally are not problematic to pollinators, but when bloom is present, there is a bee hazard statement that is on the label, which says in part, do not apply this product to blooming crops and weeds while bees or other pollinating insects are actively visiting the treatment area. On the surface, that sounds fairly restrictive, but it actually allows for night application of a pesticide even during bloom, as long as because, I shouldn't say not as long as, but because pollinators generally forage daylight hours and are not active at night. So if a crop protection product is needed on a blooming crop, it can still be utilized at night. So the idea of a 48-hour notice basically, in my opinion, is a move by the state to degrade the protection that the labels already have.
Well, my question is, how does this address what has become the most commonly used family of pesticides, which is the neonicotinoids, that have a residual life, a half-life of hours, days, weeks, months, in some cases even years? How is the EPA addressing this? And I guess my second question would be, why do you think the EPA has been promoting these state pollinator protection programs?
Well, in answer to your first question, most of the neonicotinoid pesticides are utilized in seed treatment formulation, and so it is problematic if they're utilized on bee attractive crops, because the bloom will have residue levels, or I wouldn't even say residue levels, because it's the actual active ingredient is present in the bloom and the pollen and the nectar on the bee attractive plants. But there are a number of formulations that actually can be also foliarly applied, and so the bee hazard statement that I mentioned that would allow for night application obviously is not nearly protective enough with a neonicotinoid type pesticide.
And why do you think the EPA is so active in promoting these state pollinator protection programs? What do you think their motivation is for this?
Well, I think what they're actually trying to do is pass the buck, because, technically the regulating FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, is the regulation that gives EPA the authority to regulate pesticides in the United States. And it also gives them the ability to hand that regulation off to the various states in their own jurisdictions, as long as the states have laws which are either equal to or more restrictive than federal. And by creating these state pollinator plans, EPA, in my opinion, is basically turning a blind eye to the fact that the plans themselves are, I would say, formulated in error of federal law. I don't know if that's a good way to state that, but they're basically going to promote violation of federal law under the guise of protecting bees by removing them from the landscape. Well, the label does not require bees to be moved. It actually requires the applicator to do something, which is to not apply it during the daylight hours on a blooming crop. And the pollinator protection plans apparently feel like that's too restrictive, and they're trying to, hence the 48-hour notification and move bees out of the way.
I can think of no other situation where the victims of the damage are expected to be responsible, and the perpetrators of the damage are exonerated. This is a very strange twist of logic, in my view, and it seems that the beekeepers are seen as an inconvenience. Now, commercial beekeepers may be able to move their bees on short notice, but even for them it's difficult. I deal largely with smaller beekeepers and hobbyists, and there's no way that they can move their bees, whether they have 48 hours notice or 2 weeks notice. And the question is whether they should be expected to at all.
Well, there's two things that raises, though, Tom, and that is commercial beekeepers also have problems moving bees, not because that it's hard to move bees, but because the assumption is that there are safe zones that you can move them to. And most states, and I'm not familiar with New York enough, but here in the Midwest where I am, we have a lot of, in my case, soybeans is probably my primary concern. We have probably 25 to 30% of our land mass planted in soybeans, and the assumption is that if I get a call from farmer X, 10 miles from my house, that I can just pick up those bees and move them. Well, in fact, I've done that in the past, actually moved bees and placed them on my personal property, right on my property, for a short period of time to keep them out of harm's way while an application was made on soybeans. Well, the interesting thing that happened was that I actually got sprayed on my own place because the applicator would look at the registry, and there's no bees registered on my particular property. So the assumption is that they're not there. And so what ends up happening when you start moving to allow for pesticide applications, it becomes chaos because nobody knows where these bees went to. And the current plans have no mechanism built in to create safe havens to move them to. And then the other issue that it raises is that, of course, the native pollinators are fair game to kill. We'll just take them out of the landscape by mortality, and therefore we won't kill them in the future. I guess that's how that logic is supposed to work. So you'll have to repeat your second question. If
well,
you could do that, please.
I think you answered my second question, and my second question was, what do you think the motivation of the EPA is? But as you're talking, I'm thinking, as a honey producer, what isn't recognized is that if you move a yard of bees or a colony of bees, what you've done is you've interrupted their productive capacity, and they have to readjust to a new location that may or may not be as productive as the one that they left, but in any event, it's going to take them several days to readjust to the new environment and to learn the territory and begin to bring in the crop. And if you do that, what you've done, it's a very short summer, and for many of these crops, it's a very short bloom period, and it would be like moving dairy cattle around and disrupting them and interfering with their milk production because they've been stressed and disturbed and they have to readjust. It seems to me, from the perspective of a beekeeper, that this is complete insensitivity to the realities of beekeeping, and this is the kind of thing that's produced when you have 10 wolves and 2 lambs.
There's one other thing I think we should touch on here, Tom, and which is also part of these most of these pollinator plans. They want to do everything with best management practices as opposed to mandatory restrictions, and that's, we want beekeepers and pesticide applicators to get together over coffee, and talk about it. Well, communication is great. But the other thing that they're doing is part of the best management practices is the state plans. Most of them, or many of them, actually are best management practices for bee operations, which to me, I have no clue why a regulation or a protection plan for pollinators would need to focus their energy on beekeeper management practices within their operation, but that is indeed part of the plan on most states.
Well, you said something earlier in the conversation that has stuck with me, and you said that these aren't protection plans for pollinators, but rather protection plans for applicators.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I would characterize it, because if you're actually trying to protect pollinators, you would stick with what the label says, which is do not apply to blooming crops or weeds if bees are foraging in the treatment area. And anything other than that is an excuse to move the liability from the applicator who may be about to violate the federal label, and place the responsibility for bee mortality right directly on the back of the beekeeper by basically, if you don't move your bees, you deserve to have them killed. I mean, I don't know how else you would characterize that.
This whole effort in New York State is supposed to protect pollinators. And, basically this whole discussion has been about bees. There are so many other species, such as the butterflies and hummingbirds, and so many other species that are not protected. are really of no concern because they're not perceived as having any value.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, and that's partly why I stress the fact that they're talking about managed pollinators here. All the other species of pollinators under these state plans are just fair game to be killed in an application, and that's just flat wrong in every respect, and it's really unnecessary. You can utilize crop protection products based on the characteristics of the pesticide. If it's a really long residual pesticide that takes days or weeks to break down, applying it to bloom is just off the, it should be a no-brainer not to use a pesticide like that. But some of the pesticides degrade much quicker, some of them in less than 8 hours. And if you need to utilize a crop protection product during bloom, basically that should be the only option. And it appears like that's just not good enough for regulators, chemical manufacturers, and pesticide applicators. And you notice I purposely did not mention farmers because they get caught in the crosshairs here. And it's unfortunate they do, but they utilize the products that are recommended to them, and I would state that in most cases the farmers are given an option would use pesticides that are appropriate.
Jeff, have you heard from any of the commercial beekeepers in New York in regards to this whole effort?
Yes, I actually talked with several of the beekeepers in New York. Because I'm on the National Honeybee Advisory Board, I connected with beekeepers in that part of the state, and one of our board members is actually from New York, and when this issue of the New York Pollinator Protection Plan was breaking, we had conversations and passed information back and forth, and the commercial beekeepers in the state are significantly concerned. Until they actually roll out what the rules are going to be, it's a little bit difficult to agree with or disagree with it, but it appears like the trajectory is not good at this point.
Well, Jeff, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and have a pleasant afternoon.
Well, I think the conversations that we have on this program will have an influence over that. We have to make some fundamental changes. We can't continue to deal with just smoke and mirrors, however well-intentioned it may be on the part of some of these people.
I couldn't agree more. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Please tune in next week as Tom and I continue to explore the impact of neonicotinoids. This has been June Stoyer with your Organic View radio show. Have a great afternoon, everyone.